I couldn't breathe the night I woke up, drenched in sweat and trembling from the same nightmare. Again. In the dream, I was trapped in thick smoke, hearing whispers calling my name, dragging me deeper into a suffocating darkness. My chest burned, and my legs felt paralyzed. Every time, just before I woke up gasping for air, the smell of spicy jollof rice would linger, rich, smoky, and oddly sickening. I knew something was terribly wrong. Something about Mama Femi's food stall didn't sit right with me. Let me take you back to the beginning of this tale, a story of greed, lies, desperation, and dark secrets. Everyone in our small township adored Mama Femi's food stall. Her fried plantains were perfectly crispy, her pepper soup bold and fiery, and her jollof rice, oh, her jollof rice, was like nothing you'd ever tasted. Every bite felt like a celebration. People said her hands were blessed by the gods. But things weren't always that way. A year ago, her food stall was just another struggling spot in the bustling market. I remember passing by and seeing her sitting alone on a wooden stool, staring into her empty pots with tired, hopeless eyes. She would rub her worn hands together as though trying to summon a miracle. Her face, lined with exhaustion, carried a sadness that seemed heavier than words. It was the look of someone who had lost more than just business. It was the look of someone slowly fading from life itself. Then, like a whispered prayer answered in the dead of night, everything changed. Mama Femi's stall became the busiest place in the entire market, practically overnight. Her food smelled different, more intense, more irresistible. The air around her stall seemed to hum with an enchanting warmth, pulling people in with an invisible grip. Every dish she served was divine. People swore they could taste memories of joy and comfort in every bite. The aroma alone was enough to make your mouth water, even if you weren't hungry. Even I couldn't resist. I remember the first time I tasted her jollof rice after her sudden success. It was rich and smoky, its heat blooming warmly in my chest, filling me with a strange sense of comfort. It wasn't just delicious, it was powerful, addictive. But as the market celebrated her success, whispers started rising like the steam from her bubbling pots. Some people claimed they couldn't sleep after eating her food. Others spoke of strange shadows lingering near their homes, flickering just beyond the light after eating her food. At first I thought it was just silly gossip. Stories like that always spread in small towns. But then, it happened to me. It started the night I ate her pepper soup. I still remember how its sharp, fiery heat spread through my chest like a living thing. It burned, but I couldn't stop eating it. The warmth felt safe, until it didn't. That night, I had the most terrifying nightmare of my life. In the dream, I was trapped in a dark, twisted forest. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the scent of wet earth and something rotten. Thorny vines snaked around my legs, tearing into my skin as I stumbled forward blindly. The shadows between the ancient trees seemed alive, shifting and moving with unnatural grace. Then I heard it. Whispers, low and sinister, calling my name in harsh, broken tones. The sound scraped against my mind, setting every nerve ablaze. My chest grew tight like something heavy and unseen was pressing down on me. My feet refused to move, held fast by the creeping roots below. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, clawing at my sheets like a drowning person breaking through the surface. My room was silent, except for the faint lingering scent of smoky spices, sharp and unmistakable, just like her pepper soup. The thought latched onto my mind like a stubborn thorn, refusing to let go. The nightmares didn't stop. Every time I eat her food at night, I found myself back in that dark, twisted forest, running. Always running. But no matter how fast I moved, the shadows moved faster. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, more demanding. They spoke my name with venom and hunger, promising something worse than death. My chest burned as if an unseen hand was squeezing the breath from my lungs. Each morning I woke up weaker, more drained than the night before. My reflection in the cracked mirror by my bed looked unfamiliar, haunted. Dark circles stained the skin beneath my hollow eyes, and my face grew gaunt and pale. But it wasn't just me. Strange misfortunes swept through the township like an unstoppable storm for anyone that eats Mama Femi's food. Businesses failed overnight with no explanation. Healthy children grew pale and listless, their eyes distant and empty. Even the powerful market chief, who prefers her food to any other food, and is known for his wealth and sharp mind, lost his entire fortune in a single devastating accident that no one could explain. Through it all, only one place thrived: Mama Femi's food stall. Her fire never went out, her pots never ran dry, and her line of eager customers only grew longer, even as the township slowly withered in her shadow. One evening, determined to avoid the haunting pull of her food stall, I walked the long way around the market. The air was thick with the familiar aroma of her cooking, spicy, smoky, and rich. The scent clung to my senses, tempting me despite my fear. As I turned a corner, something caught my eye. Her stall was still lit, but something felt off. Mama Femi wasn't serving customers or stirring her usual bubbling pot. Instead, she stood frozen behind her wooden counter, her back rigid, her head bowed as though trapped in deep thought or fear. I ducked behind a stack of empty crates, holding my breath. She slowly reached under the counter and pulled out a small clay jar. My pulse quickened. Her trembling hands fumbled with its lid before she hesitated, staring into the darkness beyond her stall, as if searching for unseen eyes. Then she did something that made my stomach twist. She bent over her cooking pot, but it wasn't bubbling. It sat cold and empty, its blackened surface dull in the dim light. She shook the jar, letting a fine, pale powder spill into the pot, her lips moving silently, as though reciting something forbidden. Her voice cracked, raw and desperate, like someone pleading for mercy or forgiveness. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. What was she doing? Why was her face twisted in such unbearable sorrow and terror? The image of her trembling hands and desperate whispers haunted me through the night. I couldn't close my eyes without seeing her face, etched with fear, guilt, and something far darker. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. There was only one person who could explain what I had seen: Papa Oho, the oldest and wisest man in our township. His years of knowledge stretched beyond memory, tangled with myths and ancient truths that people spoke of only in whispers. I found him sitting beneath the sacred iroko tree, his weathered fingers tracing the patterns carved into his wooden staff. His presence was as solid and enduring as the earth itself. "Papa Oho," I whispered, afraid of being overheard. "I think something dark is happening at Mama Femi's stall." His ancient eyes narrowed, the light in them dimming as though he already knew. He leaned on his carved stick with a heavy sigh. "You are not the first to suspect her," he said slowly, his voice thick with weariness. "But listen carefully. There are things in this world you cannot understand, things older than our words, more dangerous than our fears." His words wrapped around me like cold fingers, tightening with every breath. My skin prickled with dread. His voice trembled, not with age, but with memories too terrible to share. But it was too late to turn back now. The truth was coming, dark, heavy, and unstoppable, and somehow I was already part of it. Papa Oho's warning echoed in my mind like a restless spirit as I crept back to the market that night. Darkness clung to the narrow paths between the stalls, and the air felt colder than usual. Only the distant beat of ceremonial drums broke the eerie silence. The wind carried the faint scent of spices, sharp, smoky, and far too familiar. I crouched behind a stack of worn crates near Mama Femi's empty stall. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would give me away. After what felt like an eternity, she emerged from the shadows, clutching a small clay jar close to her chest. Her face was tense, etched with deep lines of worry and something darker. Guilt, perhaps. With trembling hands, she opened the jar and carefully sprinkled a pale powdery substance into her cold, empty cooking pot. Her lips moved in whispered incantations, soft, urgent, desperate. Her voice cracked, trembling like a leaf caught in a violent wind. A chill raced down my spine, rooting me to the spot. This was no ordinary seasoning. Whatever she was doing, it was wrong. I held my breath, frozen in place, as Mama Femi's head snapped toward my hiding spot. Her eyes glinted like a cornered animal's, sharp and wild, scanning the darkness with a hunter's instinct. The market felt impossibly quiet, the air thick with tension, pressing down like a heavy blanket. "Who's there?" she hissed, her voice sharp and cracked, more frightened than angry. My pulse hammered in my ears. Slowly I began to edge backward, willing the shadows to swallow me whole. But fate had other plans. My foot brushed against a stack of old woven baskets. They tumbled down in a loud splintering crash that tore through the silence like a scream. My breath hitched. Before I could bolt, she was on me. Her hand shot out and latched onto my wrist with iron strength, her nails biting into my skin. Her face twisted in panic, her eyes wide and wild with something deeper than rage, desperation. "What did you see?" she rasped, yanking me forward. Her voice trembled, not with anger but with fear, raw and clawing. I struggled, my wrist burning under her grip. "Nothing, I swear." Her gaze burned into mine, her chest rising and falling like she'd run a mile. For a moment she looked broken, like someone hanging on by a thread. "Please, I won't tell anyone," I stammered, still twisting against her unyielding grip. My voice shook with panic, but her grip only tightened. Her shoulders slumped, as though the last of her strength drained away. Suddenly she let me go and staggered back, clutching her chest like something inside her had shattered. Her knees buckled, and she crumpled onto the dirt floor, rocking back and forth with haunted eyes. Tears carved deep lines into her hollow cheeks. "I didn't want this," she gasped, her voice hollow. "I had no choice." Her words spilled out like a broken dam, rushed and desperate. She spoke of hunger, of her children's thin faces and empty bellies. Her business had been dying, her family fading with it. Desperation had driven her deep into the forbidden forest, to the edge of what should never be sought. "There was a man," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A spirit in human skin. He promised me I'd never know hunger again." Her breath hitched as she clenched her fists. "He gave me the powder, said it would make my food irresistible, but warned that I must never stop using it." Her eyes met mine, hollow and haunted. "If I stop, the price will be far worse than hunger." My knees buckled as her confession clawed at my soul. Her words twisted in my mind, wrapping around me like vines in a dark forest. "The powder, it feeds him," she choked out. "Every bite, every meal they eat, it takes from them." Her voice broke. "Their luck, their joy, their lives. It drains them, so he grows stronger." I staggered back, bile rising in my throat as images of smiling customers flashed in my mind. Faces now gaunt, hollow, cursed without ever knowing why. Tears streamed down her face as she buried it in her hands, trembling with regret and despair. I tried to stop once, but he came for me. He came for my children." Her words pierced like daggers. She wasn't just trapped, she was enslaved, bound by hunger, fear, and something far worse than any curse. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to get away, to flee from her dark confession. But something rooted me to the spot, pity, fear, maybe even hope. Her broken sobs clawed at my chest. "Please, don't tell them," she begged, her voice a jagged whisper. "They'll burn me. They'll kill my children." The weight of her plea pressed down like a crushing stone. I knew the town wouldn't understand. They'd cry for vengeance, demand blood. But her secret, It was killing everyone. I drew in a shaky breath. If you want to save them, you have to confess. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with panic. No, they'll... It's the only way, I interrupted, forcing strength into my trembling voice. He'll never stop otherwise, and neither will the curse. Her shoulders sagged, crushed by a hopelessness too heavy to bear. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Finally. She nodded. At dawn, the market elders gathered in the town square, summoned by my frantic pleas. Their lined faces twisted with disbelief as they listened to her broken confession. She spoke of her deal, of the dark spirit's demands, her trembling voice weighed down by guilt and despair. Every word she spoke landed like a death toll. When she finished, the market chief stood slowly, his face etched with sorrow. "The curse must be broken," he declared. "We cannot live under its shadow any longer." Mama Femi collapsed to her knees, her sobs piercing the still morning air. Judgment had come, merciless and final. Night fell thick and heavy over the township as the elders gathered at the edge of the forbidden forest. The air was sharp with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the twisted branches above seemed to shiver with anticipation. The dark woods loomed, stretching endlessly like the jaws of a waiting beast. Papa Ojo led the procession, his frail figure steady and resolute. In his hands, he carried a worn leather pouch filled with sacred herbs and a rusted ceremonial blade passed down through generations. His eyes glinted with grim determination, a man confronting a curse older than memory. Behind him, the market chief held the cursed clay jar, its surface etched with eerie, faded symbols that seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight. Mama Femi walked last, her face ashen, her eyes hollow. She clutched her worn scarf as though it could shield her from the horrors she had unleashed. The ritual began with whispered incantations, ancient and fierce, carried on the cold wind like forgotten prayers. The elders formed a circle around a stone hearth piled high with dry wood and bundles of enchanted herbs. Flames roared to life, crackling like bones breaking in the silence. Papa Ojo's voice rose above the wind, steady and commanding. "We call upon the spirits of light. Hear us!" His chant echoed, filling the darkened woods with raw power. The wind howled in protest as if something unseen writhed against the invocation. The market chief stepped forward, lifting the clay jar high above his head. "Let this cursed vessel be broken," he declared, his voice trembling but resolute. With a sharp, final motion, he hurled the jar into the heart of the blazing fire. The clay shattered with a deafening crack, sending a cloud of dark ash spiraling into the night sky. An inhuman wail erupted from the flames, a sound so cold and piercing it cut straight through the soul. Mama Femi collapsed to her knees, clutching her chest as though the spirit itself clawed at her heart. But the elders did not falter. Their chants rose louder, fierce and relentless, pushing back the creeping dark. The wind shrieked in defiance, but the fire burned brighter, consuming the cursed powder until nothing but glowing embers remained. As the final ashes scattered into the wind, the air stilled. The heavy, suffocating presence lifted, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt sacred. The forest exhaled, free at last from the grip of an ancient, vengeful hunger. The days that followed were slow and uncertain, marked by grief and healing. The township, still bruised by the curse's lingering touch, began to mend. Mama Femi's once thriving food stall stood empty, its charred remains left untouched, a solemn reminder of promises made in desperation. Children dared each other to approach it, but never stayed long. The memories it held were too dark, too real. But Mama Femi stayed. She worked humbly, honestly, her eyes forever shadowed by guilt and distant sorrow. She swept the market paths before dawn and carried heavy baskets for weary vendors. She spoke little but helped much. Slowly, hesitantly, the people began to accept her again. Forgiveness came not from grand gestures, but from quiet acts of service. She stitched torn market bags, watched over restless children, and offered a kind word when few would. She rebuilt her life piece by piece with no magic, only sweat, resolve, and remorse. The past could not be erased, but over time it faded, its sharp edges worn down by kindness, resilience, and an unspoken understanding that no curse is ever truly forgotten, only endured. The moral: success built on lies, desperation, and dark secrets will always come with a price. True prosperity comes not from shortcuts, but from honesty, sacrifice, and the courage to face the consequences of one's actions. A reminder of promises best left unmade. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. The end.